Greetings, family. Welcome back to the Learning Channel here on YouTube with Dr. T. Owens Moore. I would like to talk today about July 2024. Yes, like July, but we're going to call it July. And the Colonizer. A whole lot's happening here in July 2024. So we're going to talk about the evil fight against true justice. And what I'm really going to do is really have a book review of two books. I'll break those down a little later. But two books that I think are paramount to discuss things in our society right now. But I want to dedicate this lecture, talk, discussion to the life of Sister Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Strong sister. She passed away this July. She was a drum major for justice. She fought for reparations, some of the things we'll talk about today. Helped establish Juneteenth as a holiday. You know, a lot of white folks don't like that. Opposed the Iraq War. You know, a lot of white folks don't like that. So oppose a war that we now know that was unjust, but she was vilified when it happened. She legislated for Violence Against Women Act. I mean, she was trying to do some progressive things. She's gone. So we look at her as like a giant. She stood there by herself. You think of people like Cynthia McKinney, Congresswoman from Georgia, who was railroaded and ousted from the Congress, stood up for some of the same principles. You think about Barbara Lee out there in California, who wasn't given her just due to seek the Senate seat that was let go by, or, you know, Dianne Feinstein passed on. But you got black woman in the Congress doing some real significant things. But here, I'm dedicating this to Sheila Jackson Lee. So we have a whole lot going on. So we had this in July, the Copa America, and we had the Euro Cup. We're talking about soccer. You know that, well, Argentina won the Copa America, and then Spain won the Euro Cup. Argentina has become the focus of racism in soccer following a celebratory song that players chanted after the Copa America victory. A social media video on the account of Enzo Fernandez went viral. The song attacked the heritage of the French, or the France national team, citing the players as Africans. A lot of those teams in Copa America had Africans, black people on the team. Colombia, black people. You know, so you have these countries that you don't necessarily think of us as, you know, being in those countries, but we were the top athletes on some of those teams. France was one of them. Philippe Diallo, the president of the France team. Argentina has become the focus of racism in soccer following a celebratory song that players chanted after their Copa America victory. A social media video on the account of Enzo Fernandez went viral. The song attacked the heritage of the France national team, citing the players as Africans. So what? Philippe Diallo, president of the France Football Federation, condemned the actions. He even formally lodged a complaint with FIFA and the Argentine Soccer Association. Now, you know, there's a whole lot of problems with how those athletes are being treated when they go abroad in Europe. So the black athletes have had some real serious problems. Now, if this is not taken into, I don't know, consideration or addressed, you're going to have some real serious problems in the real world. So now listen to this. I think I have a news report that shows, if you can listen to this. This is a news report about the same thing, wondering why the star athlete Messi didn't say anything. Beyond him, look at what the vice president, I think, of the country said.
Argentina caught in the eye of a storm, and yet the captain is silent. In fact, Argentina's Undersecretary of Sports, Julio Garo, demanded an apology from Messi over the racist song. A request to clarify the matter may be fair given the circumstances and the fact that this is enraging. Countries and political channels have caught wind of it. But what followed? Garo was sacked from his position. How dare he question the legend Messi? Not just that, Argentina's vice president, Victoria Villarruel, defended Enzo and Lionel Messi. So much, so she even called the racist song the truth.
No colonialist country is going to intimidate us for a song on the pitch, or for telling the truths they don't want to admit. Argentina is a sovereign and free country. We never had colonies or second-class citizens. We have never imposed our way of life on anyone. I support you, Enzo. Messi, thanks for everything. Argentinians always hold your head up high.
Now, do you even know the history of Argentina? I'm serious. Go ahead and do your own research. Those people wipe those melanin-dominant people out. That's why you saw no black people on the Argentinian team. But throughout South America, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, you see black people on those teams, but Argentina wiped them out. Now, Spain also, has their problems because you have black people to go over to play on those European teams. So basically, the colonizer and the countries today, if you see the people who dominate in these soccer matches, most of them are, on European-based, European-run colonized teams, but you got black players. And you think about in Copa America, all these Spanish-speaking places all over because the Spanish colonized. In South America, the only country that's not speaking Spanish is Brazil, speaking Portuguese. So you think about the influence of the colonizers in the past, and you see the French, the British, Dutch, Portuguese, Germans, all of them were in these countries imposing their culture on the indigenous people. And so the language that's spoken in most of those countries over there, Spanish, because they were the conquistadors coming in, thrashing and dashing and killing and making sure you speak their language and live the life of their world. So this Argentinian woman, vice president, is saying, look, we've never done that. But as a country, they wiped out those African people. So think about the mentality then that's in the world today, this colonizer mentality that no one else is wrong. No, that they're not wrong, but everybody else has a problem. Argentina, they took some of those people from the Nazi regimes and brought them to Argentina. So you see the infiltration of this fascist, racist kind of mentality in that world, and you start to see where the problems exist. Now check out this connection to, not so much connection, but how the colonized mind works and seems to get away with things. I want to say get away. 4 years after being caught in the fire of a political scandal, Mark Sanford is headed back to Congress with his Argentinian mistress turned fiance by his side. They let white people get away with stuff and they can keep moving on. Think about Andrew Gillum down there in Florida. He was attacked by the media for some indiscretions and he's now out of politics, but white folks can keep on coming back. We're going to come back to that Mark Sanford name, but again, his Argentinian mistress. I only made the connection there because we just talked about Argentina, and we're talking about this guy, Mark Sanford, the colonizer, being able to get away with things. Another kind of colonizer mentality that we can discuss in that southern region of the United States. And for those looking at this, even though I'm talking about the United States, when I get to the book reviews, we're going to go a little bit more global and not just talk about the United States, but look on Netflix. There's a program about this Alex Murdaugh. This guy was a lawyer and tried to get away with killing his wife and son. What? Said, I didn't do it, but killed him. You think about all the people who just get away with things and the colonized mentality, like they can just do whatever they want to do. I think there used to be a man said that he could walk down Central Park or walk in Central Park, kill somebody and get away with it. That's the same one, got shot the other day? Shot at? I don't know how you get shot. We're talking about in July now. We're talking about July. Even though I mentioned this South Carolina white privilege situation here about someone trying to get away with murder. He didn't, but we'll look at the book review and you'll see things happening in the past that seem to be still occurring today, and explains why you can't seem to get out of this quagmire or this swamp of racist mess. So when I say this person who was shot, how do you get shot at and not get shot? A clear shot to the head and you get skimmed on the ear. Doesn't make sense. The stories will come out later on, but we don't have no time to focus on that because we're talking about the reality of July here, and we have to look at the intensity of things that are going on. So I want to give a book review. We're going to get through a book review. Actually, two that I consider challenging reads, but details that really give us a real importance of history. One is called The Apocalypse of Settler Colonialism, The Roots of Slavery, White Supremacy, and Capitalism in 17th Century North America and the Caribbean. So it's again centralized, a certain time period, around the 1600s and starting about the 17th century. And then you have a book by Repair. It's called Repair by Katherine Franke, Redeeming the Promise of Abolition. Now, Gerald Horne's a black man, Katherine Franke, a white woman, discussing very similar issues. And I think we can look at these two books as very important items of discussion. So if you get a chance to go to a bookstore, buy these books. Okay? Let me go give a quick review. First with the Gerald Horne book. I'm excited about this one because that's my signed copy from Brother Horne, 2018, when I met him. The apocalypse, that like doom and gloom. So we're talking about the apocalypse that came about as a mentality of people wanting to go take over other people's lands. So details. I'm not going to read the whole book, of course, but if I was going to write this down, I'd do a book review. I'm going to talk to you about it as a book review. Let's see. So the three horsemen of the apocalypse. So excellent writer, very detailed in terms of the words and the vocabulary and the way he breaks things down and ties everything together. He says, what is euphemistically referred to as modernity is marked with the indelible stain of what might be termed the three horsemen of the apocalypse. That is slavery, 1, 2, white supremacy, and 3, capitalism. They all go together. So those people I just mentioned, Alex Murdaugh and Mark Sanford, they come up out of this capitalistic system that came from white supremacy that stimulated by slavery. It still exists today. With the bloody process of human bondage being the driving, animating force of this abject horror. And then it says, decades ago, the Guyanese scholar Walter Rodney sketched adroitly how Europe undeveloped Africa. And we've gone over that before. So when you ever get a chance to read Walter Rodney's work, Gerald Horne is citing his work. He uses words like flesh peddling. We got to stop talking about the slave trade. Can't call stick up a trade. He took people. Flesh peddling. By commissioned pirates. That's right, governments created an opportunity for people to go legally, in their context, take and steal people. So they were basically gangsters. And this set the stage for why we have the so-called American Revolution, 1776. Gangsters. Running from strict religion, huh? Business schools are cathedrals of capitalism. That's an interesting phenomenon to think about that. Because you think about business schools, especially on HBCUs, they should be thinking about black businesses. No, they teach those kids maybe to go work with Monsanto's, JP Morgan, companies that may be exploiting black people. Remember that? Enron and all these other places and the whole debacle we had with the mortgage crisis back 2 decades ago. So you now have a situation where the business schools are cathedrals of pushing capitalism, not like independence and revolution. So like a seesaw, London rose, Africa and America fell. So that's why when you hear the term about the British Empire never set, because they had colonies all over the planet. So as Africa and America fell, London rose. And it had to do with the so-called forced migration of people. The English succeeded as colonizers, largely because their society was less successful at keeping people content at home. People who came here to America were like criminals, or the poor, or the desolate, the people who had nothing. Those deplorables that this guy named Trump likes. Those people were the ones that came and started the country, running from strict religion somewhere else. So running from somewhere else, creating havoc for other people in their own lands. One of the people, Oliver Cromwell, his name comes up a lot. He was the Lord Protector, who just deposed the king in London, then went on to rampage through Ireland. So the people in Ireland, they don't like Oliver Cromwell. Put this in context, there is an Oliver Cromwell, a black one, that helped out with the American Revolution, fighting with George Washington in the Revolution. But that's not the same Oliver Cromwell here. So again, details in history that you can go investigate on your own. Thompson, this guy named Thompson, involved in this trafficking, was also a tireless trafficker in human lives, taking up Grant in St. Kitts to facilitate his growing involvement in the African slave trade. The busy Thompson also had a hand in the Canadian fur trade. I'm only going to make a slight note here. I just got back from Antigua. Antigua has a bilateral relationship with Canada. Scratch my head why I have a Canadian flag flying in a black nation. This is a bilateral communication. It says St. Kitts, all those islands, the island chain, Bermuda, Barbados, St. Kitts, St. Lucia. Now, it took me about 7-hour ride from America to get there. Had to do a layover. But imagine them in the back in the day by boats. And sometimes by boat with cargo, as in human cargo. It couldn't have been in 7 hours. Oh my goodness, we're talking about weeks of travel on a boat. People getting sick and dying. Terrible situation. I got a book over here called Terror at Sea by Sawandi Mustaqim, giving some mentality of people who were doing the traffic and the people who were trafficked. Horrible experience. So this pernicious thing about race kept coming up, but this talk about white and what race is, he talks about that later on in the book. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, as it was declining, that was a chance for the British and others to start now controlling the waterways. More important, a migration from societies with racism to racist societies was required in order to boost the new dominant slavery. Thus, simply ruling slavery illegal without a focus and consciousness or assault on racism was bound to allow this pestilence to fester and morph, as it has done in the United States since 1865. So, racism is really white supremacy. But white people will define racism as that, because they'll call you reverse racist for talking this. That's psychology right there. You're the bad person. So colonies, so settler colonialism was categorically different from non-settler colonialism. How true? The former often entailed a bloody ethnic cleansing, frequently amounting to racialized genocide that dwarfed similar processes in non-settler colonialism, not to mention more contemporaneous versions. So, yeah, kind of a little wordy there, but you just put that perspective what's going on over there in Gaza and the Jewish nation, the Zionists killing those Palestinians. That is settler colonialism right in front of you. And you seem to be powerless to stop that. The Moors. The London's contracts with Levantine and Mediterranean Muslims were numerous, and Turks and the Moors were to be found on the English soil as traders, diplomats, and even pirates. Now remember after 1492, the Moors had to roll out of Europe. So they were there for almost 100 years, 711 to 1492, but they had to roll when this white expansionism came about, this colonialism came about. So as they were leaving, they also started to, they had all the boats, they had the gunpowder, they had the weaponry, the knowledge, they knew how to navigate. They were in that Mediterranean as corsairs, that is like pirates, creating havoc, stealing people's stuff from ships. And so now you got other countries utilizing them to go steal the booty, that is the cargo, the African people. So Ireland, again, became a point of discussion here because it was really like the Protestants against the Catholics, and you got now the whole Irish thing, and then Cromwell becomes significant as somebody trying to wipe them Irish out. That's why Irish don't like Alexander Cromwell, and you have some real rifts between the European countries. London was late to the colonial feast, but quickly made up for lost time by helping to weaken the Dutch, early arrivals. London had assisted the eminence of the Netherlands in the late 16th century as the sea-bound nation faced an existential challenge from Spain. And it's interesting, both Netherlands and Spain had excellent black soccer players that could have helped their team win. And actually, the Spain and Spanish team did have two black players. A young brother who was like the youngest ever to score in the Euro America, and then Netherlands had some real superstars, but it just didn't come through. But you don't think about black people on these white colonizing teams. In response, the cornered Dutch opened their doors for the arrival of Spanish Jews, along with fleeing Catholics and even Puritans from England, helping to form a model of pan-Europeanism. Now, we talk about pan-African, but there's a precursor to what we now know as whiteness, because you got all these people mixing Puritans, the Spanish Jews, the Catholics, and now you're mixing them. Now they're no longer that. They're just white. This starts to get into the dynamic of the apocalypse, and how they then become the controllers of everything, and why is it that black people are always on the bottom? Because of this mentality that's being forged. Indeed, one of the themes of this book is not only how enslaving colonialism forged whiteness and a pan-European concord in order to overawe rebellious Africans and indigenes, but how it also served as a basis for a kind of enlightenment to attract Europeans to these war zones. Thus, the French Caribbean, those who happened to be Jewish, enjoyed rights they did not have in Paris. Can we break this down today? Because we think about people saying that the Jews had no involvement in the slave trade. The Nation of Islam was ridiculed for presenting books called The Secret Relationships Between Blacks and Jews. They didn't write the articles. They compiled the articles showing that there was involvement with the Jews in the slave trade. And now it makes sense because what? They had to go flee. And some of the places they flee to were places like Brazil. A turning point in London's lengthy jousting with Madrid. Now, London and Madrid, again, Madrid, Spanish, London, British. And so if Jamaica was colonized by the Spanish, those people, black people in Jamaica, be speaking Spanish right now. But they were kicked out. A turning point in London's lengthy jousting with Madrid was Spain's ouster from Jamaica in 1655. This had manifold consequences. England could not be indifferent to the fact that this great victory was aided immeasurably by the defection to their side of feisty Africans disgusted with Spain's misrule, along with a goodly number of those who were Jewish and understandably apprehensive about what the ongoing Inquisition portended. As this feat was being inflicted, others who were Jewish were fleeing Brazil, where they had sheltered under the cloak of Protestant Netherlands, as Catholic Portugal had surged back into control of this vast territory. That is, after 1654, almost all the remaining Dutch and Jewish merchants fled Recife, as Recife. They don't pronounce the R there in Portuguese. Recife, with many decamping to the Caribbean. So that's how they got to the Caribbean. Places like Barbados. This group then fled to Jamaica, Barbados, and other English colonies. Now you start to see the influence of the European or the white people there in those colonies. And then in America, you got the New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam, which became what? New York. Talking about Manhattan. So this is now, I'm still in the introduction. I might not be able to get through the whole review. I might have to write this down for you. But it's just so fascinating how he ties in information to make us really feel the history today. Let's see. It says, The interpretation of the epochal 1676 crisis is also revealing, with some of the U.S. left initially interpreting it as a righteous revolt by the poor against the wealthy. Eliding the uncomfortable reality that a central demand was a more aggressive colonial offensive to plunder the indigenous. That's too much. That's too much. But I always talk about the deplorables were the ones that were trying to change the government. Then it was interpreted as a joint uprising by poor Africans and Europeans against the elite that was foiled by concessions to those defined as white, to the detriment of those not so designated. So the I don't know if you remember the Baker's Rebellion, the Bacon Rebellion. The Africans joined on the wrong side. We should have joined with the native peoples of the land. We fought with the white people. It's a mistake. Ultimately, they could not overcome the poisonous snare of white supremacy. That is, the seeds of the fiasco of an election in November 2016 in the United States, where the less affluent of European descent, including more than half of the women of this group, found their tribune in a vulgar billionaire, has roots in the cross-class coalition that spearheaded colonial settlement in the 17th century at the expense of the indigenous and enslaved Africans. As much as I would like to really digest how I broke the whole book down, this is too much. The contents of the book. Basically, there are 9 chapters. I just got through the introduction. There's no way I can get through the 9 chapters. The beginning, 1. 2. No providence for Africans and the indigenous. 3. The rise of the merchants and the beheading of a king. 4. Jamaica seized from Spain. Slavery and the slave trade expands. 5. The Dutch ousted from the mainland. Slavery and the slave trade expands. 6. More enslaved Africans arrived in the Caribbean along with more revolts. We got to start looking at the revolts. We fought back. 7. The spirit of 1676, the identity politics of whiteness and prelude to colonial secession. 8. The glorious revolution of 1688, not so glorious for Africans and the indigenous. And the last chapter is called Apocalypse Now. So basically, it remained true that there were simply not enough people in the pan-European community willing to venture into the war zone that was the Americas. So basically, if you got all these Africans there in the Caribbean, and they're Africans and a little few puny white people, they can't govern all those people. That's why you had the Maroons and people fighting back, going to the hills, resisting bondage. And as they resisted, they encouraged others to resist. And guess what? In the islands, it became futile to try to hold back. And we know what happened in Haiti. Haiti kicked all those colonizers' butts. And to this day, they are being vilified for that. Because you kicked the oppressor's butt, got them off your neck, and now you're the enemy. We as melanin-dominant people need to understand that, because the pan-European community is sticking together. This created the pressure for a broader base for the colonial project, boosting republicanism, anti-monarchism, getting rid of the monarchs. And that's what signaled Oliver Cromwell that they liked him there. He was trying to get rid of those monarchs. The emerging category of whiteness, the concomitant devaluing of Africans. That's why we got the problems with the soccer. Devaluing the African contribution to humanity. And indigens, you don't even think about the native peoples of the land that were wiped out. You don't even talk about that. That's a whole other discussion. And not least, the process of launching capitalism. It's a money thing. Capitalism. Next, we're going to talk about how the capitalistic system has destroyed not just nations, but cultures. So we'll talk about repair next. So I really thought I'd be able to read these comments I have about the books, but it's hard. The subtitle is Redeeming the Promise of Abolition. Now, Franke has 4 chapters. Poignant, clearly written with footnotes where she got the information about what the people were going through at that time. Chapter 1 is Land and the Question of Reparative Justice in the Sea Islands. Chapter 2, Black Self-Governance at Davis Bend, talking about Mississippi. And the first one was dealing with the Sea Islands of South Carolina. That's why I said those 2 people I mentioned earlier, those Southern folks who are just extensions of the colonial system, they're just still getting away with murder and cheating. Chapter 3, on the ongoing case for reparations. Chapter 4, reparations today. So, if you've ever been to the Gullah Islands, Beaufort, even Hilton Head area, we used to have all that. After the Civil War, white people did whatever they could to get that land back, to control that. It says, where government policy left them largely on their own, freed people were able to take greater control of what it meant to be free than in any other community in the South at the end of the Civil War. Their vision of freedom provides a model of what could have been. Just leave us alone. Let us have our own so we can do our own work. But people scheme against you having anything that looks like it's equal or better. From the start, the northern conquest of the Confederacy, the federal government waged parallel military and humanitarian campaigns. So you got this North versus the South kind of fight. The Confederacy had to be defeated, but as we know, with the lost cause, they seemed to win the war. Law figured centrally in many of these decisions. So Port Royal, South Carolina is where she focuses on the first part of this chapter. The Port Royal Visitors Experiment. And then a different experiment was the one there in Davis Bend, which was like the Jefferson and Joseph Davis, these Confederate slave owners. It was their property. And so that was in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So how do you deal with emancipated people? Where do you send them? What do they do? You know that's criminal. Oh, you're free to go. And where are you going to go? Without any tools, without any land, without any resources, what are you going to do? That's why it became problematic. People like Sherman and Howard, these generals, Grant, they did the best they could to try to help out with collective resource redistribution. But we had a president named Andrew Johnson that acts like this crazy fool that we have now that doesn't seem to have any political strategies. He's just a, what do you call it? A titular head for the capitalistic enterprise. You'll know who I'm talking about later on. So a lot of this unearned endowment enjoyed by white people is what's creating this problem right now for equality. The lucky few of my generation, as she says, who stand in the next 20 years to benefit from a lottery-like windfall are burdened and should feel burdened by an obligation to disgorge what is truly an unjust enrichment made possible by the failure of the 19th century upper class actors to deliver meaningful justice to millions of people when slavery was disestablished in this country. It was never done properly. You know that. They did whatever they could to be sure black people wouldn't have access. British Beaufort was most likely named after Henry, Duke of Beaufort, because we know all these names that we have over here, some are extensions from other countries, including Africa. But here we're talking about the English connection. One of the Lord Proprietors, while Carolina was a province of Great Britain. Now we know about one of the queens, Queen Charlotte, you know, the whole connection between that and Carolina's black woman queen. So to fight all this is late in the afternoon on Sunday, November 1861, Admiral Samuel DuPont's fleet arrived at Port Royal with General Thomas W. Sherman's troops aboard the Navy's vessels ready for a ground invasion. They were met with an enthusiastic defense from the white locals, the St. Helena riflemen, aided by over 1,000 reinforcements from the German artillery from Charleston and the Charleston Artillery Battalion, and basically all white Confederate folks. and the South Carolina Volunteers. And you got to think about this because you think about the brother Ahmaud Arbery that was killed by these white vigilantes, ex-police officers, and a so-called just normal neighbor because he was in their community walking. That was Georgia, but this is all the same mentalities. People think that they can control and run things and do it the way it's like a God complex. And so she's breaking these things down. Again, I can't read this whole book, but just so, like, what? I don't know if you ever know about the Maori people in New Zealand. They had a white paper policy. They were trying to, they did the same thing to the Native Americans in this land, try to make them be Christian and force the European colonizer culture on them. The same thing happened to the natives of this land. So this colonizer mentality has wreaked havoc all over the world. They're in Australia with the Aborigines, New Zealand with the Maori people, and this land with the Native Americans. That's why that woman from Argentina, the vice president, white woman, saying, we didn't go around the world doing that. We didn't do that, but your little white nation, speaking Spanish, got rid of all the black people in your little nation. So land confiscated from Confederate loyalists was somehow gotten back into their hands. The view that land auctions would be a good way to allocate the land to the free people as a kind of reparations for enslavement was held by northern missionaries. So northern people were coming down south to help give ideas on how to make equality happen. Out of concern that the free people would be outbid by white speculators, some people said we can't do it that way. Because that's how it goes. Look at our communities today. You're in a black community, you're in a black neighborhood. A white person may move in, or something may change in the community where the property values go up, taxes go up, and the people can't afford that anymore. It happens all the time. My little community, I grew up in Penland, Pennsylvania, a little small place, Penland Village. Historically black, all black, 100% black. Today, 2024, I would probably say 50-50 and on the decline of black because now you have white people moving into this formerly black community in 2024. Imagine what was going on back then. Well, we had no access to resources. Today, there's at least access to resources, but still the same problems with gentrification. So we used to work for the lash, because this is now after emancipation and trying to be free. We used to work for the lash. Now we work for the cash. So there were questions about what do you guys really want? Of course, people know what they want. They just want to be free. But what does free mean? That's the question. Over and over, the freed people lost control of their homesteads, their crops, and the land they had hoped would be home to a new kind of freedom. So there's some good guys, but mostly the bad guys creating a situation where it's sharecroppers coming on board. Then you had those Africans who were being defiant, like, no, we're not leaving the land. Again, the war happened, Civil War. The people who lost were removed. Well, they're all white. So when they came on back, they could devise ways to steal the land from the people. So those who are not in the United States, who are not from this country, who don't understand what the people here have struggled through, you can't just look at a black person and say, oh, why are they so poor? Why are they so indigent? Why are they so uncultured? There's a reason why. Because they were targeted to have nothing. Listen to this. Sherman's refugees from the mainland expressed a strong desire for land. The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor. We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own, declared Garrison Fraser, a 67-year-old man who had been born and enslaved in Granville County, North Carolina, and who had bought his wife and his wife's freedom before joining the safety of Sherman's military operation. Remember, Sherman's the one that said 40 acres and a mule. That's where it came from. He never got it. Stanton asked Fraser whether the freed people would prefer to be settled in communities of mixed white and black people or in areas restricted to Negroes entirely. I'll let you contemplate on what he said. I want you to think about how you would say that today. How would you want to view it? But to Sherman's surprise, Fraser had a ready answer. They preferred to live alone, apart from white people, for there is a prejudice against us in the South that it will take years to get over. We're in 2024. 2024, and we still have not gotten over it. So this is visionary. Fraser continued, the way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor. We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own. Other members of the free black community told him, what is the use of giving us freedom if we can't stay where we were raised and own our own house where we were born and our own piece of ground? Simple. But white people have been devious. Sherman's orders of 40 acres a mule never happened because he was being fought against. People like Andrew Johnson, after assassination of Lincoln, things started to take a downturn. After Obama was released from his 8 years, Obama was released from his 8 years in power. American tragedy. Then what happened after that? We got Trump into place. Not we, but the system, this capitalistic system, its roots of slavery, capitalism, and its roots created that scenario. And now we're in 2024, and it might happen again. Shortly after learning that the land they had been promised was stolen from them and returned to their former enslavers, a group of freed people in the Sea Islands wrote General O. That's Otis Howard. That's where Howard University is named after. So he was a opponent of fighting for black rights. But listen to this. It is difficult not to hear the echo of Johnson's, because Johnson vetoed all this stuff. You ain't giving those black people land. No, we're not going to just allow them to stay there. We're going to give it back to the Confederates. I don't know what they called it back then. We're just going to let these other people come back and have their land back. So he vetoed anything that Sherman and people were pushing, Congress was pushing. It is difficult not to hear the echo of Johnson's veto message in the remarks of a different U.S. president 150 years later when he responded to calls to prosecute white supremacists. Remember what happened in Virginia? Remember what happened in Virginia? Peaceful protests and white white man rode through the crowd in the car, killed a white woman. And the president said there's good people on both sides. When he responded to calls to prosecute white supremacists with concern that some of them were very fine people and were unfairly judged. Johnson's veto message emits the noxious odor of white innocence, combined with the notion that enough had already been done for the freed people. Let's move on. All that Black history stuff, stop reading that stuff. All the stuff about diversity, let's get rid of that. Affirmative action, nah, it's gone. Whew. Deception. You got hoodwinked, bamboozled, trusting in the government, broken promises. Trusting in the government, broken promises. In a matter of months, Johnson administration transformed a radical experiment in reparations through the redistribution of land ownership to black people into the testing ground for the contract labor and converted the land reallocation project into one of land restoration. The arrangement locked formerly enslaved people into economic dependence on white people, denied them any form of compensation or reparations for the obscene crime of slavery, and secured a postbellum socio-economic structure within which white people would accumulate wealth through property ownership, while black people's relation to property resulted in their generation's long impoverishment. In the end, white people were the primary beneficiaries of the federal government's land policy. Just like affirmative action, white women were the primary beneficiaries of that in this systematic structure. So the Homestead Act, they did whatever they could to make sure black people would not have. Perhaps even greater insult to the notion of reparative justice for formerly enslaved people was the passage and implementation of the Homestead Act in 1862. The law provided title to up to 160 acres of government land to any person who improved the lot by building a dwelling and cultivating the land. So basically, white folks made sure that this would not happen for black people. Being free was by no means the same as being free, a status reserved exclusively for white people. So that's the challenge with slavery and emancipation. You didn't fight for it. Someone signed it over to you, gave it to you. That means you didn't fight for it, which means they can take it back and reinstitute it. Y'all think this is a joke? These Zionists killed 180,000 people in a matter of a few months, and you are now closing your eyes like it didn't happen. Genocide. Those same people were the ones that were in a genocide decades before. You heard of something called Auschwitz, Germany? Oh, no. Auschwitz, where they had something called the Holocaust. That happened. And these same people are creating a Holocaust to another people. Who's right? Who's wrong? I mentioned earlier about names of people, but let me talk about how these plantations were run and how some of those plantations, some of that property was used and is still used for like hunting. Tracts of land, hunting. People could live on that land. No, tracts of land for white people up north to come down and go hunting. So in that manner, property is not being used for the people, it's being used for individuals. It's called capitalism. So this author is mentioning names about people who sold plantations and how the plantations now came down to people who we know today, like that guy named Mark Sanford, as one example. Let's see. Hutton gave Fusal plantation to stockbroker Friend. Yeah, Friend, that's how it works. That guy who's now accused of giving Clarence Thomas all his money. That's how stuff works. When you do this for me in court, hey, you can have these $4 million, trips that accumulate to that amount. You can have these, I don't know, not rewards. I don't know, bribes. That's all it is. Hutton gave Kusal plantation to a stockbroker friend, Juan Sabalas, in return for introducing him to his second wife, General Ford's heiress, Marjorie Merriweather. Post. Edward and Marjorie Hutton's collective wealth allowed them to build Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, several years later. You start to see the names connected and the property the people had. You know Trump's got property down there in Mar-a-Lago. Hutton also gave his longtime dog handler, Marshall Smith, 600 acres of the land. I can't believe there's a black man as a dog handler. In 1965, Dr. Marshall Clement Sanford, Sr., father of former South Carolina governor and former U.S. Senator Mark Sanford, bought the Kusal plantation and bought back the 600 acres that had been given to a dog handler. Mark Sanford, the white man I showed you earlier who was caught with a adulterous relationship, some woman over in Argentina. Mark Sanford wrote in his Furman University senior thesis, thus Kusal plantation has come full circle, returning to its original use as a family farm. Family farm was like a plantation. Get people locked up. The Sanford family placed the property 1,584 acres under conservation easement worth $2,500,000 in 2011. That's how white money works. That's what this author is trying to say. Some people have to deal with that issue of your easy money has been a detriment to others. So by not focusing on reparations, as I said, I dedicated this to Sheila Lee Jackson, who's now gone, because she focused on reparations. So with these two books, if you want a book, go to a bookstore. Want a black book, go to a black bookstore. Want any book, go to a bookstore. So I would say, for a bookstore, take a picture of that, call up Nia, the Molly, at Madu Bookstore, so you can learn and teach. It's up to us. So here at the Learning Channel, I want to keep this as brief as possible, but it got lengthy as I started to look at the details. You got to get these books on your own and break it down and study them and understand why we're in this position today because of what happened in the past. Never let someone tell you, oh, stop worrying about the past. If that's the case, then you shouldn't be having access to the money you got from the past. So, I'll be back sometime this summer because of the Olympics coming up. Who knows what's going to happen from the Olympics? We'll have a discussion on the Olympics next month. So, again, you lie. Understand what's really happening. Peace and blessings to you.